Well, we all know that fantasy sports is a booming industry, but where did it begin? It's believed the first fantasy game was created right here in New York back in 1961, a baseball game called Strat-O-Matic. And joining us now is the founder and the CEO of Strat-O-Matic, Hal Richman. Hal, good to have you in studio.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for kind of being the father of fantasy sports, because I mean, our entire lives, I don't care if it's football, baseball, basketball, hockey, NASCAR, we are diving into fantasy sports, and it really did begin with this game, Strat-O-Matic.
Well, it did begin with Strat-O-Matic in the sense that the man who discovered rotisserie baseball, which is the forerunner of fantasy baseball, was a man named Dennis Ocon, who worked for the Times eventually, and he was in a league with all Strat-O-Matic players in New York City. And he decided, he then was told to write a book in Massachusetts, in a town called Westfield, I believe, in the middle of the state, very small town. There were no Strat-O-Matic players in Westfield. So he had to come up with something. He loved baseball and he was the man that actually came up with fantasy baseball. Then they call it rotisserie baseball. He never profited by it.
It's amazing how that happens, right?
Yes, it is.
What's unique about your game is your game empowers us to be managers. Quickly explain it. Through rolling of a dice, taking statistical information and dice rolls, you're playing a game.
Well, the cards, which you referred to with the dice, are really the values of the players. How many home runs they hit, how many doubles, triples, the pitches, how well they get people out, how many home runs they give up. All these statistics are created through dice probabilities on the cards. So when you roll the dice and you look at a number, you know it's there because of a very good reason.
It's like Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid. It was all about the dice roll and waiting to see the outcome via the dice, right?
That's right. Well, Dungeons and Dragons was created by Strat-O-Matic people.
Oh, there it is.
They played Strat-O-Matic when they were young.
It all comes back to Strat-O-Matic. But now, when you did this way back in 1961, you were creating individual statistics for every player. How did you take those simple stats and turn those into a probability chart back in 1961 when there weren't a whole lot of computers back then?
There were not. And I'll even go back further. 1947, when I was an 11-year-old, and I played a game called All-Star Baseball, and it was not to my liking that it only measured hitting, nothing else. And also I wore down the spinner, making it very inaccurate. I played it so much. So I said to myself, what about dice? Why can't someone play baseball with dice? But I didn't know dice probabilities at 11 years old. So I rolled the dice 5,000 times.
No, you
came up with a dice probability table, and that's where it all began.
This all started from the mind of an 11-year-old.
From an 11-year-old.
Yes. Oh my God.
Who loves athletics, but was a very poor athlete.
Well, but you know what? Thank you, though, for being a poor athlete and creating this for us. But here's the thing. Every player has a unique set of traits. So, say, at the end of a game, Chris Davis has a higher probability of hitting a home run than maybe Ike Davis would.
Yes, and we know exactly what numbers come up more because of dice probabilities. And he will have more probability on more dice numbers rolled with higher probability of coming up than Ike Davis would.
When I looked at some of the guys that play this, Rex Ryan, Tim Robbins, Bob Costas, Spike Lee used this in his film. Keith Hernandez talks about this, it seems like, all the time.
Well, Keith Hernandez, the story about Keith is very interesting. When he had his tryout, his first tryout, he put his Strat-O-Matic baseball game in his trunk.
Right.
Brought it down to the tryout. You know, he was going to be there for a while, and he opens it up, and it's not there anymore. His father had taken it out in order for him just to focus on going on the field and doing what he's best at, playing first base, which he did a very good job at.
He still plays this game now.
He plays the computer version of it right now.
Right.
But our sales are pretty close to even. We still have many board game players, and of course we have a lot of computer players.
Your new online version takes into account, has new updates every single day for players, which takes into account hot streaks and cold streaks as well.
Yes, and this is going to really be something else. I mean, to look at a card, a Strat-O-Matic card, you look at the card and you can see many times the strength and weaknesses of each batter. Now you're going to see a different card each day if the batter is really gyrating, if his averages are really varying by a tremendous amount. And the cards cards will vary tremendously, which is really exciting. We also, if you're not familiar with the cards, we're going to have a statistical chart there where you'll see it go up and down. In other words, a man like Chris Davis, who hit a lot of homers at one point during the end of the season, hit, I don't know how many games in a row he hit home runs, you would see statistically, and also on his card, the home run percentage going up tremendously.
Yeah, let's take Daniel Murphy's postseason and just lock him in the Cubs series and just take that through an entire season. Let's see what this guy does. What's interesting here is that you ran this Strat-O-Matic last year in the World Series, the Mets, of course, against the Royals, and you were wildly accurate. You had Kansas City winning the first two. You had Familia blowing a save in what ended up being a 14-inning game. How do you account for this? How do you account for all of those accuracies?
Well, each major leaguer has his own set of averages, and our Strat-O-Matic program has the same set of averages, but in a program. And just that particular day, and the next 3 days in the World Series, we were on the same page as the players were, and that's why it happened. It was, but our averages over the long run will adhere to what the major league players will.
But when you played out that entire World Series, you had the Mets winning 4-2 based on managerial decisions. So,
well, yes.
What does that say?
Well, the manager does play quite a bit of part of this, as we know what happened to the Mets in the fifth game.
Yeah.
We had Harvey's line in that game,
right.
perfect.
Yeah.
Except we had, I think, in the first 7 innings, one run, or no runs, 4 hits, if I remember correctly, 7 strikeouts. He had 8 strikeouts, and 1 walk or something. We were right on.
Yeah, well, you didn't have to be the guy that walks out to the mound and look Matt Harvey in the eye and take the ball away from him. So I can understand why that would be a little bit more difficult to do that.
Very much so. I agree with you.
It's a wildly fun game, and I would recommend people get the hard copy of it because there's nothing that compares to actually physically rolling the dice.
I agree.
It really is entertaining. By the way, fans can also look forward to a movie documentary that's coming out about your game. You also do it for football, basketball, baseball, hockey. All of that is online. Hal Richman, it really has been fun talking with you. So thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right.